You are listening to Know You're Crazy. My name is Susan Denee. We all have crazy. What separates us is how we choose to deal with it. I'm going to be delivering engaging and actionable tools to own your crazy, treat your crazy, and turn it into your own superpower. I hope that you walk away from this show feeling the power and strength within you. And never forget to enjoy your journey because you are worth it. Hey folks, welcome to the Know You're Crazy show. My name is Susan Denee, and you are listening to Emotional Recovery in the Raw. If you have been joining me for a while, then you understand that I like to talk about the tipping points of our crazy in key areas of our lives. And one of those areas in our life is our professional life. How do we establish an enhanced skill set? How do we know what to do so that our confidence level rises and that we can have a more successful professional life? Well, one of the things that I recently come across with a coaching client of mine is when she called and she said, oh my God, they gave me an offer in writing, like they're going to email it to me. I didn't even know they do that, which sort of made me chuckle, but also made me realize that a lot of the workforce out there today is inexperienced when it comes to negotiating for their best self, understanding how do I get the best possible salary and how do I advocate my attributes to the best of my ability. This in and of itself is a skill set, which is why I'm excited today to talk about the guest, Erin Thweatt. Erin Thweatt is a dynamic executive coach and seasoned HR professional driven by a firm belief in the power of an individual's potential. His mission is to create meaningful connections between talent, ambition, and purpose by empowering executives and entrepreneurs to bridge the gaps in their personal and business lives, allowing them to thrive in their zone of genius. Before establishing his practice, Respark Coaching, Erin forged an impressive career across diverse industries, including financial industries, oil and gas, sales and marketing, human resources, and program management. During his tenure, he was pivotal in shaping executive and broad-based compensation strategies for esteemed companies such as Activision Blizzard, SpaceX, and DoorDash. These experiences revealed to him unique insights into the inner workings of high-performing individuals and teams tackling the most audacious, creative, and technical challenges. Erin also leverages his expertise by coaching and mentoring women, specifically on the art of negotiating their salaries and other compensation, whether as employees or consultants. His guidance has proven invaluable to a multitude of professionals and executives spanning diverse roles within technical and creative domains, empowering them to optimize their earnings and seize greater opportunities. I'm excited to have you today, Erin. I listened to a podcast that you so graciously forwarded me, and it provided such clarity for me as to the level of your expertise in this area. I'm excited to have you. I'm just going to turn this over to you. I want to know, tell us the story, the background. How did you get to where you're at? And how did you become, I get three-part question here, passionate about what you're doing right now?
Sure. I'm excited to be here too. Thank you so much for this opportunity, Susan. And, the name of your podcast is important because as we'll get into, and I'll be talking about how is I think people would be crazy not to advocate for themselves, crazy not to negotiate. So this all came about, now I'm living life as an executive coach and, I'm living my passion in full alignment of doing what I've always wanted to do, which is amazing. But it started out me swashbuckling my way through corporate America and learning a lot of lessons that now is something that I impart to my clients, my audience, and just anyone that I can be of service to. So originally I'm from Alaska, and the state motto of Alaska is the last frontier. And I grew up living a lot of that last frontier life, chopping firewood, carrying water, no electricity for the most part, living in what seems to be like a different era. And then I go to my friend's house who had electricity, and I would see TV and question why I didn't have that life. And so kind of set a spark and ambition to get out into the world. So upon high school graduation, I left the state of Alaska, went to school in Colorado, ended up in Los Angeles, where I really shaped my corporate career. ultimately, I was a very ambitious person who wanted exposure to a lot of things. And I'd say I met my goal. I got my mission accomplished because I had about 5 different careers, worked for a lot of different companies. And, I guess I like to say, ultimately, I hit kind of the top of the rung in a corporate sense. I worked at SpaceX for a long time. So I went from the last frontier to the final frontier.
Nice, nice. Do you recall the moment? I believe that when you help individuals in such a delicate area of their lives, salary negotiation, advocating for their best self,
Yep.
that to me is an important skill. But it really is about, was there a moment when you just were like understood that people need to know how to do this? Like there's a service here that I can offer. Like, when was that moment? What was the tipping point for you?
The tipping point for me was when I got into the profession of compensation. So, if you've ever accepted a job and you got an offer letter, much like your client was so ecstatic to receive, somebody had to figure out what number goes in there. And then when you're at the job, you got a raise based on your performance or a bonus or an equity grant. Somebody had to figure out what those numbers were. Usually a function kind of behind the scenes where your manager goes and talks to, or even HR goes and talks to, and somebody you typically will never meet or even hear about. And that's the function that I did. And I started out doing it in executive compensation for a Fortune 500 AECom in downtown LA. And that was determining what the CEO makes, the board, all that. Then I transitioned into some of the other companies you listed, where I did broad-based compensation. What does everyone else make? And so being the decision maker, seeing how the inside game works, I was like, wow, I really could have pushed it in some of my former offers.
Yeah. You said something that you referenced when your other interview about really understanding the company dynamic. I want to say the philosophy. Is that correct?
The compensation philosophy.
Compensation philosophy. Can you give some insight into that? What you mean by that?
For sure. So, just kind of cap off my story a bit so we can come into that specifically. I've negotiated pretty much every job offer I've received, starting right out of college. How well I did it is a different story. And so I lived the life of you change jobs every 1, 2, 3 years. And so it's a 1-minute conversation, right? To actually say the words, to advocate for yourself, to ask for more. And if you change jobs 7 times in your career, that's 7 minutes to negotiate your entire life's earnings.
Wow. Yeah.
And we don't get the opportunity to train for this minute. We're not taught in college how to do it. So it's really, it's quite an extraordinary bummer at a minimum and failure at a maximum by our society, our institutions, just the way things are set up, that we as young adults and just as individuals never really formally trained in that regard to advocate for ourselves, but we're trained how to do well for a company, but not for ourselves. And so I was living that life, figuring it out on my own, didn't really have anyone to ask. Didn't come from a family that was like, here's how you do it. It was all figuring out all on my own. And, when you're really young, you kind of have your peers and you're all figuring it out at the same level. So all I did was, well, I'll just try. Right. And so each job you try a little better, maybe pick up a tidbit of information. And then when I got into the skill set of compensation, determining what to pay people, you saw all the variables. And I started to reverse engineer my experiences from having done the work, from being the decision maker for over a decade for multiple tech companies. And I realized that compensation philosophy is kind of the hidden secret, the hidden driver that so many career coaches and other people who teach salary negotiation miss. Everyone says state of range, but really compensation philosophy drives everything else. And it's about total compensation.
And to like bring it home on that point, if someone was to begin to negotiate a salary, is that an actual question you would advocate or you would suggest that they make? And what is your compensation philosophy? Is that something that you would suggest to them to use? Because those are great. That's a great term. And I just don't ever hear that term. I've never heard it until I heard you say those words. I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, it's because it's a term that insiders use when you're working in HR and you are, the management team, and we have 500 employees. 5,000 employees, 50,000 employees. What is our compensation philosophy, right? You have to start from that qualitative side to then determine how does that cascade out into the quantitative. What should our ranges be? Where do we want to position? Do we want to fight against Google and try and win those software engineering battles? Or do we let them go because we choose to have a different philosophy? That's where it really comes into play. And a lot of companies struggle to even define compensation philosophy. They go an extraordinarily long time without formally defining it, but one is defined anyway through their actions, right? So really what you're doing so the answer is yes. That's actually one of the first tenets and principles of how I coach people, because the negotiation starts on the first phone call. And a lot of people are kind of caught off guard. So that's that phone screen. Maybe the recruiter found you off of LinkedIn where you applied and they pulled your resume. And so it's a nice 15, 20-minute chat, making sure you're a fit. And the last question, what are your salary expectations? And that question right there it's game on. And most people say, well, we give a range or whatever. And I like to coach people, say, I'm so glad we're talking about this. What is your company's compensation philosophy for this position? Because you're trying to elicit more information about what other elements of compensation are there. Is there bonuses? Is there equity? And then that ultimately drives total compensation, the pie, and salary is just the slice.
That's fantastic. I love that. And the reason I love that is because a lot of times I think that we, as individuals, get caught off guard. My background for 25 years was debt collection. So the ultimate negotiation from, learning on the phones all the way up to, director of marketing, all that good stuff, right? But negotiation was the game. And it's so interesting. So there's the reason I bring that up is because for me, based on my background, I understood that everything's a negotiation. Now, that doesn't mean that I did that to the best of my ability when it came to salary compensation. I didn't do too bad, but it doesn't mean that I knew that. So it's interesting that a lot of people just don't know what words to use. And I think that that is like part of the education process that I believe you likely, from the sounds of it, take your clients through is this is what you say when they say this. I mean, I just love that because it's actual hands-on tools that people can apply that they'll remember so that they stay in control of that conversation. I mean, because ultimately that first phone call that you're referring to, it really is about establishing, I don't know if this is the right way to say it, an equal playing ground that I'm worth this conversation. So let me ask you, I'm going to interview you instead of you interviewing me.
Yeah, I mean, you've probably always heard that phrasing. It's a two-way street. You're interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing you.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people do that regarding the job, but not necessarily when it comes to pay. And kind of what this is as a corporate professional, this is a skill set and experience that's implied, you're expected to have. And if you don't do it well, you just could still get the job potentially, but you may miss out based on a conversation you didn't have.
Why do you think people withhold the difficult conversation of salary? I mean, there's probably obvious answers to this, but your experience working with individuals and seeing what you've seen as an expert, what is it? Why do they not talk more about it?
Oh, it's a dynamite question. To try and kind of corral it and do it concisely, I think, above the waterline where we actually have this conversation, it's just most people, if you have a corporate career, you don't talk about it a lot, right? And a lot of people come from homes where they don't talk about money. And that's the quantitative. What about the qualitative where, maybe you grew up in a home where, hey, you're being too loud, be quiet. Basically asking for your needs becomes a delicate relationship. You're afraid to rock the boat with, in the beginning, your caretakers, and eventually maybe your peer group, and on up to relationships, and even in your first job. And these habits, you don't get, if you're working in a corporate job, sometimes you don't get a lot of opportunities to kind of take a run at them. And this is assuming you're not doing personal development, which is very helpful. But then when these crucial moments come every few years, you're accustomed to not swinging for the fences. You're accustomed to not even articulating your value when you are giving it. And then you kind of maybe let it slide. And so I think it's more about habit, what you train.
Yeah, that right there, what you just said is one of the reasons why I was looking so forward to our conversation. I mean, before we got on here, I said, I can tell you're somebody who not only teaches this and advises others, but you're somebody who's personally done the work. Because for that personal insight to understand where the fear lies for a lot of folks when it comes to compensation, but just in general, finances, and what we without going down a big dark alley of what we're all raised with, like we all recognize that, but it is ingrained in a lot of folks, the fear of financial insecurity.
Right.
So not only is this a communication of self-worth, can I, one, advocate for myself? Am I comfortable enough advocating for myself? Do I have the confidence to advocate for myself? But then let's tack on this other thing, which is, what if I don't get the job? What if I ask for, and they say no? I mean, because I think that in and of itself encompasses the financial insecurity piece of it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And, I've obviously worked with both women and men on this topic. In kind of the last 2 years, I've focused on women exclusively, and we can go into why that if you'd like. But what
Yeah.
I'm trying to bring forward is direct feedback from my clientele. They don't want to feel like a burden. They want to seem greedy. They want to rock the boat. And I think, I'm curious, I've asked them, and it's kind of this never ending question I keep exploring. Where does that come from? But in the near term, in the immediate term, I'm trying to help my clients address that and pivot that trajectory and say, it's actually necessary for you to advocate for yourself. It's implied, it's expected. You rocking the boat is almost expected. And I say it this way: every job offer negotiation is like a kitchen remodel. It deserves at least one good counter.
That's right. Totally agree with that. Ladies, be a burden. Do what you got to do. My goodness. Yeah. But I can also appreciate, I don't know, culture influence when as a woman, as somebody who woke up to, and I'm not saying this in a victim way, but just woke up to patriarch in my own professional background. When I woke up to that realization of how much I had allowed myself to be influenced, and I didn't know what I didn't know until I knew it, right?
Right.
But once I woke up to that, it became very obvious to me different things that, some men just don't even suffer from that. I'm glad you're working with women on this because, women, God, it's such a stereotype. I'm just, sometimes we're known to be too much caretakers, or we're too concerned about what everybody else thinks. And then we put our own self on the back burner and not advocate, right? And so your work with women, tell me a little bit about that. Like what is it? Do you see a big growth spurt when you're working with women? Like once you give them the feedback and the tools and the insight, are you seeing lives change? I read a couple of your testimonies on your website. Pretty impressive.
Thank you. Yes. Going to why, like when people work with me, of course they experience massive growth, but here's why. So as an executive coach in my executive coaching practice, my work is really 50-50 men, women, founders, executives, entrepreneurs. But when I do job offer negotiation consults, I've been doing this as like consulting for about 5 years. It was about 90% women. And I'm like, okay, I know a lot of women, I work with a lot of women. My network, I used to live in LA a long time, so I had a big network out there. But I'm just like, there's an undeniable trend. So I started to lean into it more, look into it. And I think I kind of came up with a couple reasons from a market perspective, and then chose to like really lean into a predilection that I had, which was the market trends where women are doing amazing things, creating amazing opportunities for themselves. But number two, I don't feel that society has made it conducive for women to easily lean into advocating for themselves. You touched on it earlier. Then number three, women are willing to raise their hand and ask for the help. And then as a son of a single mom, someone who's always had a disproportionate predilection to being supportive of women, I'm like, I have a skill set, I can help, let's go.
Yeah. That's fantastic. That is fantastic. So my story, and I will keep this brief. So with negotiating for me and salary, it just always made sense with a debt collection background. I mean, don't hate me, anybody watching the show right now. I always like to put that out, especially because I'm a recovered alcoholic. So it's like if anybody in the rooms, hang on. But it just made sense to me to always start what I thought was high, right? But what I didn't know back then, and what you're talking about, is this philosophy of what packages are out there for individuals today that they're not even aware of. I mean, for me, I had listened to your show, and one of the, I'll call it a mistake, but one of the mistakes I think I made that also comes with a traditional belief system is I stayed with the same company for 20 years. Now, 40% of that pay was commission. And so I was able to kind of make my own way with that commission structure. But then there came a point where negotiating the base salary when I moved up a position, which was okay, but the details in that agreement are where it went haywire. So the money came in, but the actual job responsibilities ended up being, I'll just say, manipulated and not exactly what I had agreed to.
Right.
And I'm sure that's probably something that people run across, like the
Always.
actual job description and role and how that has to be spot on. Is that something that you talk with individuals about?
Oh yeah, and you're touching upon another key element of how I coach and train, and one of the things I hopefully illuminate to all my clients is you have to get the qualitative right before you define the quantitative. So again, kind of going back to the whole problem of when they ask you in the beginning on that first phone call, what are your salary expectations? You lack a lot of knowledge about what the role scope really entails, and your leverage is at the minimum. They haven't really gotten a chance to interview you yet and know how many of your skill sets they will need. So that's why ultimately I like to have in that beginning conversation to punt on saying a number, and then wait to go through the whole interview process. Typically there's no discussion of pay, and then you get all the information, and there's how to interview well, which is something I coach on as well. But assuming you do well, you make it through the end, you get that offer, now you got yourself a ball game. And during your interviews, you're interviewing them, you're assessing the way that they've put the job description together. Is it really accurate? You want a manager role, but turns out this is director level work, or maybe it's senior analyst, and you're like, this is principal, or senior engineer, it's really a principal engineer. That type of thing. You have to have that type of conversation, because that qualitative leveling of a job drives what pay range, whether they have an official range or not.
Yeah. It was interesting to me. So in May of 21, I left the career of 20 years and eventually, ventured out to what I'm doing now. But there was a period of time when I was still going through some personal healing, lost my dad to COVID, things like that. And there was a lot of stuff going on where I was unemployment, right? First time in my life ever. But part of that was apply for jobs. And so if someone who was in a professional role for, 20 years or so, I hadn't seen the job market. I mean, when I was putting in that application, it was paper. All right. So you're walking in, right? So now all of a sudden there's a bombardment of online resumes, and everybody's talking about algorithms and all that good stuff. But what I noticed in the job listings was there was a lot of asking and not a lot of compensation going on. Like I would read some of these job descriptions and I would be like, are you kidding me? Like all of that for X amount of dollars. And so it's really quite interesting what you bring to the table to help individuals, shall I say, filter through all of that.
Right. And one of the things is your paradigm. Before we ever talk numbers, what is your paradigm? Both with your relationship with money, with yourself. I know so many high performers in a job, they do very well, but they do it out of, there's kind of a drive of, you can still see the insecurity, you can still see the trying to prove themselves, and they work so hard and overdo it because they still think they're not good enough. And really, if they step back, evaluated how their contribution, were able to phrase it to their manager in the form of asking for a raise, they would have a good shot at that being a yes. But they don't, because they're afraid, or they don't value themselves enough, and then they don't take that opportunity. And so there's a lot of there's similarities, but some key differences between negotiating as a candidate during the job interview process and as an employee 2 years, 5 years, 20 years into your career at a singular company. Conversations are warranted, because your normal pay 3 to 5% increases don't move with the job market typically.
Yeah. That's excellent feedback. Okay, where am I at here? So we are at 5. Oh gosh, it's almost a half hour after the show. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a break. And when we come back, I loved something you said about the easiest way to get a pay raise. And it was on the interview that you did. I thought it was fantastic feedback, especially for someone like me who was with the company for 20 years. And I thought that this was just valuable information for somebody to know, but also a way to break up what the belief system may be, because sometimes people get stuck in a rut and they stay with a job way past the expiration date. And especially if they haven't done what you just suggested, like really looked at the periods of time in which they can come back and talk compensation or talk, a pay increase. So having said that, everyone, we are going to come back here shortly, and we will be furthering on the conversation about salary negotiation with Aaron Thweatt. Aaron, how can folks get a hold of you if they want to check out your program and reach out to you for some coaching?
Sure. It's Aaron, Aaron, Thweatt, Thweatt on all platforms. So send me a DM or connection request on Instagram or LinkedIn, or my website, resparkcoaching.com.
Yeah, love that, Respark Coaching. All right, folks, we will be back here shortly. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Know You're Crazy show. My name is Susan Denee, and you are listening to Emotional Recovery in the Raw. Today's topic, we are talking about salary negotiation, which in the second half, we are going to be leading into the most difficult conversations you can have and how to have those. Expert Aaron Thweatt is with me today. He is a principal compensation consultant and an expert high performance coach. Before I break in with Aaron, though, I'm going to read one of the testimonials from his website, because this is just a fine example of how he serves the community and individuals in getting what they are worth when it comes to negotiation. She wrote, upon the initial offer, Aaron made himself available to review it in depth, discussing portions I wasn't as familiar with, specifically future shares of the company if and when it has an IPO. It was impressive to see how thoroughly Aaron understands the nuances and implication of offers beyond basic compensation and bonuses. I learned an immense amount in just a few hours, which enlightened me around where I needed to focus my energy in the response to the initial offer. Without his insights, I would have made some naive next steps in the negotiation process and left literally tens of thousands of dollars on the table. I think just reading that testimonial would definitely fill me with a sense of purpose and passion for what I do, right?
Yeah.
Like having that ability to serve others on that level. And that earlier, when I referred to watching your clients' lives transform, I mean, that is the beauty, isn't it? When you get feedback like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I coach so that people don't need me, even though they keep coming back for multiple job offers or career transitions. But giving this knowledge and imbuing them with, reminding them of their own abilities and their own confidence, combined with the tactical knowledge that I've learned from my career, then they can use it for the rest of their career and kind of change the trajectory of their compounded earnings. So I know she's going to be good.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's fantastic. Before we went to break, I had hinted towards what I wanted to talk to you about before we get into the most difficult conversations you can have with someone and the training that you do around that, which I think is fantastic. But what in your experience, with what you've witnessed, what is the fastest way, or maybe the smartest way, I'm not sure how to word this, that someone can experience a pay increase?
Sure. Great question. The fastest way is to, when you start interviewing for a job, go through the processes, some of which we've discussed here, but to fully advocate for yourself throughout the whole process. And that means, not just taking the first offer, having a philosophy and a framework on why you're the best for the role, but also a good understanding of the market data and what your skill set could command in the market. And then also the individual elements, how do those work for you? Some people want a secure Fortune 500 and more salary. Other people, like myself, I wanted the startup life and I wanted equity and the shot to, asymmetric return, those types of things. So having that clarity and then how those numbers cascade from your own qualitative philosophy and clarity is going to be really informative and helpful.
Do you think sometimes people just don't stop and ask themselves the questions enough?
Yeah, it's a great insight. I think it has to do with the general fear and or resistance that gets conditioned into us about money, about advocating for yourself to a pseudo authority figure like a job or a boss. So yeah, I think a lot of
Yeah.
people just mentally, like the limbic system, you just punt it out and just go, oh, I'll just hopefully I get what I get.
Hmm. Like one of the things that I coach a lot around is relationship development, intimate relationship, couples, and then just in general. But so being in recovery and working with women in that area for so many years, a lot of them are single and they go to get back in relationships. And the one thing that I always, well, and I personally found in myself years ago, but what I find fascinating is just to stop and ask ourselves the questions: what in the past didn't work? But then
Right.
answer that question. And what would I like to experience differently today, and answer that question. But just that process of literally sitting down and doing the writing, or the diving in and asking yourself those questions to really find out what is it that you want in
Yeah.
order to, to have it in the future. And I think when we are paralyzed by that financial insecurity, or we are in a state of panic or trepidation, or we have anxiety in interviews or whatever, we can tend to hand our power over to the company. And then those are the situations where, even like a bad relationship, right? It's a bad relationship sometimes, starting right out of the gate. You didn't ask for what you need. The expectations weren't set appropriately. And now 5 years later, you're over there bitching about how the outcome was, and realizing that, kind of like a good real estate deal, you're either going to negotiate it smart right out of the gate, or you're going to pay the price later. Does that make sense? Yeah.
100%. And what you're talking about is you're spot on. What you're talking about is someone relinquishing their own agency and kind of going into a limbic response. Sometimes it's informed by trauma and whatever the case may be. But I'll tell you this, limbic responses and negotiations typically do not serve you. And so
And
if
can you
you're,
tell the audience what you mean by that? The limbic
yeah,
response.
the limbic system, our reptilian brain, fight, flight, or freeze, that same, should I run from the saber-toothed tiger or hide, that same feeling comes into play. And, even my experience years ago, and
Mhm.
for a lot of my clients, it's like, do I accept the offer? I actually want to ask for more, but I'm afraid that if I say those words, they're going to pull the offer. It's like this urban legend.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's actually not true. That
Yeah.
if you're respectful and you phrase it, the well, and 98% of the population will, they're not going to pull it. And some people are like, yeah, but what if they do? I say, then you don't want to work there, because like you said, it's a toxic relationship. Imagine your very first ask right out of the gate is met with such heavy resistance and borderline threat to pull the job offer. I mean, how's that going to go when you're years into the job and you want to ask for more?
Yeah, exactly. Do you think that sense of self agency is directly related to somebody's, how I view it, ability to remember their greatness?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a
Right.
lot of work that I do to get somebody back into that state, that mode. Because it's, well, a lot of things I say is, a lot of jobs actually expect you to negotiate. And especially in a job where that's part of what you do, like you're in debt collection, some people maybe work in finance, they're a
Mhm.
lawyer,
Yeah.
that, procurement, whatever the case may be. If you can't advocate for yourself, how can you advocate for the company?
Yep.
However, it's a paradox, because I've seen many people underdo it and for themselves come in and then do a great job, right? So it's just knowing that it's expected and welcomed.
I have had a few calls with coaching clients, one staying with the same company, but was asked to do a higher level of performance, called me in complete doubt
Mm,
about her abilities. And my job as a coach at that point was literally to remind her of her greatness.
yeah,
Why did they choose you? What skills are they seeing you display? Things like that, to talk her through it. Another one was someone who had worked for a startup company and had been solicited on LinkedIn to interview. And when she looked at that job, she thought, oh, there's no way I'm qualified. Right. And immediately the self talk had started. And, the good news, once again, it was reminding her of her greatness and her talent and her skill. And because I always find it interesting how quickly we turn that over to somebody else.
right.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know the exact research, but it's men will apply for a job if they meet 70% of the criteria. Women won't if they're under 80 or something like that.
Wow.
So
Wow.
The point is there's an inverted delta, right? So really it's just about taking the shot and knowing that you have the ability to figure things out. Here's
Hmm.
another really important lesson I like to impart. Your career, like what you do in time, is linear, but your leverage grows exponentially. So if you don't, say that first job out of college, you just accept it. Fine, a lot of people do that. Then 2 years later, you switch, you don't ask again. Now you're in your late 20s, early 30s, and you negotiate for the first time. But your leverage is starting to grow even more, and you could squeeze even harder. But you haven't developed the muscle throughout the time to squeeze as hard. Your somatic body, you're not as comfortable with pushing it, with maybe
Yeah.
walking away. And so that's how you leave money on the table over time.
Do you help individuals strategize who have, like, I had a client who had been running her own business for 5 years, had to close the doors, COVID, and then was going back into the work world, right?
Yeah.
Going to look for a company to work for. But she was diminishing her value because she didn't think nobody would hire her based on all this experience she had. Um,
Oh,
I I advocated opposite. Why would you hold back, right? Because that's the message we're sending is I'm not worthy. So I don't know, but have you come across that where people are trying to outthink the algorithms or outthink what, it's that catch crazy 22 where we're trying to outthink the person on the other end, and in the process we withhold our best.
right. Yeah, you over game theorize it.
There you go.
I think sometimes just being direct, just straight down the middle of like, here's why I'm great, here's why I'm a fit for the role. And especially a person like that who used to run their own business,
Yeah.
as an entrepreneur and coming into a corporate environment, obviously culturally contingent on the culture. Sometimes they don't want that.
Mhm.
But a lot of companies do, that autonomous thinking ahead, being a future value player is really important, great asset. And there's a lot of times that you can win on a qualitative thing, meaning your passion, your enthusiasm, the variety of your experience. And it's tough, especially for my career changers out there when I tell them this. Because when you're in the thick of it, when you're, 3 jobs in, still trying to figure out what direction you want to go, when I tell
Yeah.
them like this right now, you navigating transitions and getting this kind of different slices of the way things work is going to be a multiplicative effect later.
Mhm.
It's hard for them to see, but over time they eventually see it. And
Yeah.
that different perspective and some of the grit that you develop and
Mhm.
clarity, then your passion comes forward. That's what can make you win over another candidate.
Yeah. And would you agree that when all that's happening, the confidence level is just through the roof, right? Because you're coming across and as a company or as somebody who would be hiring somebody, I want to see confidence, right? Not
Absolutely.
ego, not shallowness, but confidence of their ability. Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of what they're hiring for in a lot of cases, rather than the actual specific, like, can you do just the job today? Like a lot of times, like we have the intangibles, I could train you in the first month how to do the actual job. But what
Mhm.
about a year later? What's going to power you through? I think you're somebody who has confidence, you have vision, excitement, you'd be great for the team, so on and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah, you have a valuable service to offer individuals, and just getting them to the point where they need to be, psychology, like really get into the mindset of coming into that. That's fantastic. Let's talk about difficult conversations. Let's
Yeah.
talk about what you do to help people have the most difficult conversations that they can have. And we're talking in a professional realm, but because you are a high performance coach, I'm sure this is also addressed in other areas of life, kind of like my Know You're Crazy show. I mean, there's these key areas in our life where we can either learn how to communicate. As I was sharing with you, I'm getting ready to do a women's retreat this weekend, and I'm doing the workshops on communication. And
Yeah.
so I geek out about this stuff because it is so imperative to the quality of our life as far as how we communicate. And so, what are some of the tips or feedback or insight that you have on that topic for the audience?
This topic is pretty much why I became a coach is the framework that I operate under and have been developing is manage the conversation. The ability to manage the conversation is the most powerful skill any human can develop. It's negotiation, politics, it's advertising. It's cutting in line at the airport because you're late for your flight. Like your ability to advocate for yourself and manage conversations rather than just take what life gives you is really where the rubber meets the road, and is the most important nexus for you to beef up your skill set on to ensure the quality of your life. But the most important conversation to manage is the one with yourself. And so that's where I have a lot of people start. It's good for preparation, both for a negotiation or if you want to have a challenging conversation with your partner.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fantastic. So I was thinking that as I was preparing for my workshop this weekend, and I was talking about it's communication and relationships and sobriety is what the workshop's around. But the thing that came up for me that I thought would be really cool to discuss with you is one of the benefits of having that conversation with yourself, and one of the benefits of working with someone like you that can help somebody sit down and have that homework in front of them, okay, is to avoid the silent agreements that will be made if we don't advocate like we need to out of the gate. Yeah. And I was curious what feedback you had on just that term, silent agreements, and how, you know where I'm going with that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing you say it. So in my Manage the Conversation framework, I have a sub framework called Evaluate Your Permissions. So that's I can have a cookie because, I work out a lot. Like I can afford it. I can spend this money. I'll earn it in the future. Right. These agreements in the moment, and I'm sure there's, multiple permutations that you haven't seen on your own, but it's those agreements there where we allow our agency to slip out, where we allow ourselves to not show up as our highest self when we could, and probably best if we did. And really, I think those silent agreements are to protect us. It's, call it your ego or your nervous system based on your imprint from the past, whatever the case may be. But it shows you, if you're making agreements like that, there's an invitation to look deeper, because it shows you're right up against your comfort zone, most likely, of making some type of change.
Yep. And I always, I comment about the necessity of the courage that it can take for somebody to make those decisions where they shift out of those silent agreements, or they shift out of something that's been holding them back. A huge one that I kind of hit on earlier with my history and my professional history was when I was on a therapy call with my therapist one day, and I had brought up my company and long-term relationship, right? And I don't recall complaining about the company that much on my therapy sessions, but she was on to something, because she had me look up, the patriarch and another word, misogynistic, I think. Anyway, she's like, look these two words up after we get off the call. And I did. And then by the time I returned to the next session, I knew that I was going to be up against a wall and that I was going to have to leave, because the point that she made with me, which I thought was super just paramount, was when we are suiting and showing up for a job that we either don't feel heard, or we don't feel compensated enough, or somewhere along the line, we are no longer happy, and we walk in that door of that company and we are miserable on some level. My misery was exemplified by saying, I'm not doing enough. Like somehow I was thinking that I wasn't performing, high performer, right? I wasn't doing it enough. I wasn't doing it right. But what was happening was I was out of integrity, because I was denying myself every time I walked through that door. And so once we get out of integrity and alignment with our best self, time after time after time, day after day after day, guess what? That lack of integrity spills over to other areas of our life, right? Because now we're miserable. Yeah. And so I think the message that you gave a little bit earlier about it's okay to either make a change or go back in and advocate for yourself if that's what's happening to somebody professionally.
100%. It's not that staying is wrong, and it's not that leaving is wrong. Right. It's what is your approach? I've worked somewhere for X number of years and I've never said anything, but I desire more. Like if you're truly happy and you don't want to ask, okay, fine. There's, we don't negotiate for the sake of negotiation. This is about, you have a desire in your heart, you observe something with your mind, you see how you're changing the company's fortunes, you'd like yours to move along with it, then it's about having a conversation. And that's kind of where in the past, I've said one of the best ways to get a raise in corporate America is to switch companies.
Yeah.
But I guess the addendum is, but you should definitely try first to ask for one where you're at.
Yeah. I mean, because ultimately when you switch companies, you are going to be switching, and it could be a good new experience. I mean, I could talk both sides of this, right? You can
Yeah,
have a great, fantastic new experience, have, a new whole opportunity with new relationships, or you have to establish all new relationships. You know what I mean? So it's just kind of, the pros and cons are on each side of that coin. But I do find that in today, for me, being someone who's in an industry for that long, or with one company for that long, is I do find that the opportunity, there's not as much emphasis placed today on you need to stay there forever, right? Like that was kind of an old culture thing where
yes.
now we get to see people change their careers, become something different, and experience new skill sets per se by doing so. Um, do you think that's looked for now more than it used to in the past? Like looking for people to change it up?
I think so. I'd say at a minimum, it's more accepted. And then
Yeah.
certain types of companies or hiring managers are looking for someone who has a diverse set of experiences. And it's tough because it's not really ever communicated. I
Yeah.
think what's more communicated or implied or assumed is what you said, like, oh, you're at a company for, minimum 3 years for it to be okay, you know?
Yeah.
And especially after, COVID, a lot of transition happened. I think that helped with the acceptance of transition and moving around. But even
Hmm.
above and beyond that, I think the pace of business and technology, you have to understand, you have 10 years experience, but have been doing the same thing for the last 8 years. And
Yeah.
the first 2 years is where you actually only learned and then you stopped. So that's where it's also important to maybe change companies, not necessarily for the immediate pay bump, whether you actually get it or not, but it's the learn versus earn equation. If you are earning, but you stop learning, you create this big delta, you're paying yourself into a corner later in your career when it's you have a family and you don't want to make a big change. So you have to be mindful of that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Any last thoughts that you think would be just absolutely beneficial for somebody to know when they get into salary negotiation, career hunting, like what it is what you do as a specialty?
Sure.
What would be, top one or two things that come to mind for you that you think somebody really would benefit from knowing?
To know that you can and very likely should negotiate and advocate for yourself. Because even if they say no, you know that you at least tried your best and the offer that they
Yeah.
gave you is truly the best. A couple other tidbits, companies that don't have a lot of structure,
Hmm.
and you're agnostic of size sometimes, but startups or mid-level companies
Yeah.
or very fast-growing companies that haven't had time to put it in. Opaque structures will disproportionately hurt you if you say nothing and could disproportionately reward you if you do say something.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah. I came from a similar background in that one right there. Smaller
Mhm.
company, well compensated, different commission, but then there were also roadblocks to some of that down the road. So you had to advocate differently for yourself and to be a strong negotiator in that world. But yeah.
For sure. And to understand time, especially once you're in the company, because when you're interviewing and they give you the offer to, hey, come work here instead, typically your leverage will never be as high as that moment, which is why it's really important to squeeze appropriately.
Act
Um,
quickly.
yeah. And then once you're in the job, then it becomes the negotiations a bit more of a campaign. And I advocate for having a genuine conversation, not a threat to leave. That's like a very,
Yeah.
very last resort. But just understand where you are in time. And a lot of people say, well, I'm going to wait till my annual review to ask for more. And I say, no, your annual review should be the answer, not the question. So about 4 to 5 months, maybe even before your annual review, you need to start initiating the conversation to change the trajectory of where your manager's head is at,
Yep.
regarding what you're paid. Because you ask at the annual review, they'll say, oh, I'm glad you brought that up. Let's put goals together for 2024 and you'll get paid in 2025.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fantastic feedback right there. Yeah. Once you start thinking yeah, that's fantastic feedback because a lot of people put it off.
Right.
A lot of people put it off. And that once again is the culture framing for you. your future versus you taking initiative and making it happen on your clock a little bit, taking some of your control back, right?
You're taking control back and also not resting on, perhaps a bit controversial, but one of the most dangerous words in corporate America is loyalty. And maybe to qualify further, blind loyalty. Obviously you're going to do a good job, keep things confidential, but the I will work in silence and they will recognize me is exactly the point I'm trying to make, as to hugely detrimental in your career. You need to have a two-way street of dialogue semi-consistently throughout your tenure at each company to ensure that you are at the market rate of pay.
Boy, that's a show right there. Blind loyalty. What else did you just say? Listening or working in silence, maybe expecting. Oh yeah. That one right there. That's huge. Huge. Like that one right there is huge. I mean, I guess at the end of the day, it's a job. You got to advocate for yourself. Yeah.
Totally. And companies, they don't not pay you, I don't think, in general, out of malevolence, but they assume you're happy if you say nothing. Hey, you did a really great job this year, Susan. Here's 5% instead of 3%. When if you would have had a conversation over a few months, it could have been 10. Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been a fantastic conversation with you. I'm so glad you came on the show. Once again, if people want to get hold of you, they can reach out to Aaron Thweatt, Thweatt, and that's on all social media platforms, correct? Which I loved, by the way. That made it so easy to find you when we were getting ready for this show. Like, it was just so simple, like everything pulled up. You have a YouTube channel. I checked out a few of your videos on there. Fantastic education, financial and in this area. Just great feedback on that. High performance coach, taking clients. I assume you are taking clients virtually and in person. I am just taking guesses here. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So, and if anybody is looking also, as you know, I am also a high performance coach, but emotional elevation is a specialty with communication. I help couples, individuals, companies talk about how do we emotionally elevate our staff and keep our communication clear and concise. You can reach out to me at SusanDenee.com. Denee is Denee, SusanDenee.com. You can shoot me an email. I'll be more than happy to assist you. Having said that, Aaron, thank you for being on the Know You're Crazy show. I believe you helped some people today, and I'm sure we will talk again.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Good night, everybody. You have been listening to Know You're Crazy.
Crazy.
And my name is Susan Denee. We are identifying, understanding, and treating your crazy one episode at a time. Tune in to transformationtalkradio.com. To connect with me or Growth Spurt Your Life, please visit SusanDenee.com. That's Susan Denee, Denee.com.